She didn't ask to marry the devil. He didn't want a wife. But when Amara Chukwuma's brother stole from Seoul's deadliest Mafia clan, the Baekho, she became collateral damage in a world of blood debts and broken men. Do-Hyun Kang, the ruthless Don with ice in his veins, gave her one choice: marry him or watch her brother die. What he didn't expect was a woman who refused to break. What she didn't expect was a monster who would burn the world to keep her. In a marriage built on hatred and sealed with violence, two damaged souls will either destroy each other or forge something unbreakable. This is not a love story. This is war. And in war, everyone bleeds. Subscribe now and hit the notification bell. You won't want to miss a single chapter of this explosive dark romance. Comment below if you're Team Amara or Team Do-Hyun. Let's go. The fluorescent lights in the warehouse flickered like dying stars, casting shadows that danced across concrete stained with history Amara preferred not to imagine. Her wrists ached where zip ties cut into her skin, and the metallic smell of old blood mixed with motor oil made her stomach turn. She forced herself to breathe through her mouth, forced herself to stay calm, even as three men in black suits stood around her like executioners waiting for the order. She hadn't screamed when they'd grabbed her outside her university. Hadn't begged when they'd thrown her into the back of a van with blacked-out windows. Screaming wouldn't save her. Begging wouldn't save Chidi. Her brother had gambled with the wrong people, stolen from the wrong clan, and now she was here to pay his debts in whatever currency they demanded. The warehouse door opened with a groan that echoed through the cavernous space. Amara's head snapped up, her dark eyes tracking the figure that entered with the kind of authority that made the armed men straighten their spines. He moved like a predator, each step deliberate, unhurried. The overhead lights caught on his sharp features, all clean lines and cold beauty that would have been stunning if not for the absolute absence of warmth in his expression. Do-Hyun Kang. She'd heard the name whispered in the Korean Nigerian community, always with fear, always with a glance over the shoulder. The Baekho Clan's young Don, the man who'd taken control at 25 and consolidated power through methods that made hardened criminals nervous. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her entire year's tuition, and his dark hair was pushed back from a face that could have belonged to a corporate executive or a model if not for the predatory stillness in his eyes. He stopped 3 feet away from her, hands in his pockets, studying her like she was a particularly interesting insect pinned to a board. Amara Chukwuma. His voice was smooth, cultured, with that particular Seoul accent that spoke of expensive international schools and generational wealth. 23 years old. Architecture student at Hanyang University. You've been in Korea for 4 years on a scholarship. Impressive grades. No criminal record. He tilted his head slightly. Your brother, on the other hand, has been considerably less impressive. Where is he? Amara's voice came out stronger than she felt, and she saw something flicker in Do-Hyun's eyes. Surprise, maybe. Or interest. Direct. I appreciate that. Do-Hyun pulled one hand from his pocket and gestured casually. One of the guards produced a tablet, pulling up a video feed. Amara's breath caught. Chidi was in a room similar to this one, tied to a chair, his face swollen and bloodied. But he was alive. He was breathing. Your brother stole 300 million won from one of our operations, Do-Hyun continued, his tone conversational, as if they were discussing the weather. He thought he was clever, skimming small amounts over 6 months. He wasn't. The punishment for theft from the Baekho Clan is death. Amara's fingernails bit into her palms. I'll pay it back. However long it takes. I'll work. You're a student on a scholarship. Do-Hyun's laugh was soft and utterly devoid of humor. Even if you worked 3 jobs for the next decade, you'd barely make a dent. No, Miss Chukwuma. Money isn't what I'm interested in. He crouched down in front of her, bringing himself to eye level, and Amara found herself staring into eyes so dark they were almost black. There was something broken in those eyes, something that had been shattered and poorly reassembled, leaving sharp edges that cut anyone who got too close. I'm going to make you an offer, he said quietly. One offer. If you refuse, I'll have my men put a bullet in your brother's head right now, and you can watch on that screen. If you accept, he lives. He leaves Korea tonight with enough money to start over somewhere far away, and he never comes back. Amara's heart hammered against her ribs. What's the offer? Do-Hyun smiled, and it was the cruelest thing she'd ever seen. Marry me! The words hung in the air between them like a death sentence. Amara stared at him, certain she'd misheard, certain this was some kind of sick joke. But his expression didn't change, and the guards behind him didn't so much as blink. Marry you, she repeated flatly. In 3 days, there will be a wedding. You will become my wife. You will live in my house, bear my name, and fulfill all the duties that position requires. His eyes traveled over her face with clinical detachment. I need a wife for political reasons that don't concern you. Your brother's debt makes you available, and your situation makes you controllable. It's a practical arrangement. This is insane. Amara's voice rose despite her efforts to stay calm. You can't just force someone to marry you. This isn't the 18th century. Can I? Do-Hyun stood in one fluid motion, looking down at her. Your brother committed a crime against my organization. In my world, I can do whatever I want with the people who wrong me. I could kill you both right now, and no one would question it. I could sell you to any number of interested parties who would pay well for an educated, attractive woman. Instead, I'm offering you a position of relative safety and privilege. He paused, letting that sink in. So yes, Miss Chukwuma, I can absolutely force you to marry me. The only question is whether you're smart enough to accept. Amara looked at the tablet, still showing Chidi's battered form. Her brother, who'd raised her after their parents died, who'd worked 3 jobs to send her to university, who'd made one catastrophically stupid decision and destroyed both their lives. She thought about her degree, her dreams of becoming an architect, the life she'd built here in Seoul through sheer determination and sleepless nights. All of it evaporating like morning mist. If I agree, she said slowly, Chidi goes free? Really free. He'll be on a plane to Lagos tomorrow with 50 million won and a very clear understanding that if he ever sets foot in Korea again, or tries to contact you, I'll kill him slowly. Do-Hyun checked his watch, as if this conversation was boring him. Those are my terms. And me? What happens to me? You become my wife. You live in luxury, want for nothing material, and in exchange, you play your role in public and stay out of my way in private. His eyes hardened. And you never, ever try to leave. It wasn't a choice, not really. It was an illusion of choice, a pretty wrapping around a prison sentence. But Chidi would live. Her foolish, beloved brother would get a second chance, even if she never would. I want to see him, Amara said. Before I agree. I want to see my brother. Do-Hyun studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. He spoke rapidly in Korean to one of the guards, who immediately left. The silence that followed was suffocating. Do-Hyun didn't move, didn't speak, just watched her with that unsettling intensity that made her feel like he was cataloging every micro-expression, every tell, filing them away for future use. 10 minutes later, they brought Chidi in. He could barely walk, supported between 2 guards, and when he saw Amara, he made a sound like a wounded animal. Amara, no. No, they can't. You shouldn't be here. His words came out slurred through split lips. I told them you had nothing to do with it. Chidi. Amara's voice cracked. It's okay. It's not okay. This is my fault, my mess. You can't. He tried to lunge toward her, and the guards held him back. Please, just let her go. Kill me, but let her go. How touching. Do-Hyun's voice cut through Chidi's pleas like a knife. Unfortunately, your sister has already made her choice. Haven't you, Miss Chukwuma? Amara looked at her brother, memorizing his face, knowing this might be the last time she ever saw him. Then she looked at Do-Hyun, at the cold, beautiful monster who held both their lives in his hands. Yes, she said clearly. I'll marry you. Chidi's howl of anguish echoed through the warehouse, but Amara didn't look away from Do-Hyun. She saw something flash in his eyes. Satisfaction, maybe, or victory. He stepped forward and produced a knife from inside his suit jacket. For one heart-stopping moment, Amara thought he was going to kill her anyway, but he simply cut the zip ties binding her wrists. Excellent decision. Do-Hyun turned to his men. Process Chidi Chukwuma for immediate deportation. Make sure he understands the terms. Then he looked back at Amara, extending one hand. Come with me. Amara ignored his hand and stood on her own, her legs shaky but holding. Behind her, Chidi was screaming her name, begging her not to do this. promising he'd find a way to fix this. She didn't turn around. If she turned around, she'd break, and she couldn't afford to break. Not yet. Do-Hyun led her out of the warehouse to where a black Mercedes waited, its engine purring quietly. He opened the back door himself, a mockery of gentlemanly behavior, and Amara climbed in because what other choice did she have? He slid in beside her, and the door closed with a solid thunk that sounded like a cell door locking. The driver pulled away from the warehouse district, heading toward the gleaming towers of Gangnam. Amara stared out the window, watching Seoul's neon lights blur past, and tried to process what had just happened. 20 minutes ago, she'd been walking back from the library. Now she was engaged to a mafia boss. "You'll stay in a hotel tonight," Do-Hyun said, breaking the silence. "Tomorrow, my people will collect your belongings from your dormitory and close out your affairs. The wedding is in 3 days. You'll be provided with everything you need. Can I at least finish my degree?" Amara heard herself ask. Do-Hyun turned to look at her, and she saw genuine surprise cross his features. "You still care about your degree?" "I've worked 4 years for it. Yes, I care." He considered this, his expression unreadable. "We'll see. If you behave well, perhaps it can be arranged." It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. Amara filed that away as a small victory. The hotel turned out to be the Signal in Lotte World Tower, the kind of place Amara had only seen in magazines. A woman in an impeccable suit was waiting in the lobby, greeting Do-Hyun with a respectful bow before turning to Amara with a professional smile that didn't reach her eyes. "This is Mrs. Han," Do-Hyun said. "She'll help you settle in tonight and handle your preparations for the wedding." He checked his watch again, clearly ready to leave. "I'll see you in 3 days, Miss Chukwuma. Don't try to run. You won't like what happens if you do." Then he was gone, leaving Amara standing in the opulent lobby with Mrs. Han, who guided her to an elevator that required a keycard to access the upper floors. The suite they entered could have housed 20 people comfortably. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Seoul's glittering skyline, and the furniture looked like it belonged in a museum. "There are clothes in the bedroom," Mrs. Han said. "All in your size. Toiletries in the bathroom. Food in the kitchen. If you need anything else, dial 0 on the phone." She moved toward the door, then paused. "Miss Chukwuma, a word of advice. Do-Hyun SSI is not a man who makes idle threats. Whatever he told you would happen if you run, he meant it." Amara stood in the center of the suite long after Mrs. Han left, her mind racing. She should be planning an escape, figuring out how to get to an embassy, screaming for help. But Chidi's battered face haunted her, and Do-Hyun's cold eyes promised that any attempt at freedom would be paid for in blood. She walked to the window, pressing her palm against the glass, and looked down at the city below. Seoul had been her home for 4 years, the place where she'd rebuilt herself after her parents' deaths, where she dared to dream of a future. Now it was her cage, and somewhere out there, Do-Hyun Kang was probably already forgetting about her, this stranger he'd acquired like a piece of furniture to fill a necessary space in his life. Amara closed her eyes. She'd survived losing her parents. She'd survived poverty and discrimination and the crushing weight of trying to make it in a foreign country. She'd survive this too. She had to. But first, she'd let herself cry. The next 3 days passed in a blur of activity that felt like being caught in a whirlwind. Mrs. Han arrived early each morning with a team of people, tailors, makeup artists, hairstylists, jewelry consultants, even a woman whose sole job seemed to be teaching Amara how to walk in the designer heels that kept appearing in her closet. The wedding dress was a masterpiece of silk and lace, traditional white with subtle Korean elements that probably cost more than Amara's entire education. When she saw herself in the mirror during the final fitting, she barely recognized the elegant stranger staring back. "Beautiful," Mrs. Han said with genuine appreciation. Do-Hyun SSI chose well. Amara bit back the retort that Do-Hyun hadn't chosen anything, that she was a convenient solution to a problem he hadn't bothered to explain. Instead, she stood still while they made final adjustments, feeling like a doll being dressed for display. No one told her where the wedding would be held until the morning of, when a car arrived to take her to a private estate in the hills outside Seoul. The house was massive, all modern architecture and severe lines, surrounded by walls that probably had more security than the Blue House. There were no guests arriving, no flower arrangements, no photographers setting up shots. Just Do-Hyun, standing in what appeared to be a study, wearing a black tuxedo that made him look like he'd stepped out of a fashion magazine or a funeral. Amara couldn't decide which. An older man in traditional robes stood beside him, clearly the officiant, looking uncomfortable. "Miss Chukwuma," Do-Hyun greeted her with a slight nod. "You look presentable." Presentable. After 3 days of preparation, tens of thousands of dollars in clothes and jewelry, and a dress that belonged in a fairy tale, she looked presentable. Amara felt hysterical laughter bubble up in her throat and swallowed it down. "Let's get this over with," she said instead. Something flickered in Do-Hyun's eyes. Approval, maybe, or satisfaction that she wasn't going to make a scene. He gestured to the officiant, who cleared his throat and began speaking in formal Korean that Amara's 4 years of language study barely prepared her to follow. She caught enough to understand the gist. Do-Hyun Kang taking Amara Chukwuma as his lawful wife, in sickness and health, until death parted them. Death. That was probably the only thing that would part them, Amara realized with a chill. Do-Hyun hadn't gone to all this trouble just to grant her a divorce when she got tired of the arrangement. "Repeat after me," the officiant said, and Amara mechanically spoke the vows that bound her life to a stranger's. Do-Hyun's responses were equally emotionless, his dark eyes fixed on her face with that unnerving intensity. When the officiant declared them married, Do-Hyun stepped forward and lifted her veil. For a moment, they stood inches apart, and Amara could smell his cologne, something expensive and cold like winter. His hand came up to cup her jaw, thumb brushing across her cheek in what might have looked like affection to anyone watching. "I'll ruin you for other men," he whispered, low enough that only she could hear. His breath was warm against her lips. "By the time I'm done with you, you'll never want anyone else to touch you." Then he kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It was claiming, possessive, designed to remind her exactly who owned her now. Amara stood frozen, her hands clenched at her sides, refusing to respond, refusing to give him the satisfaction. When Do-Hyun pulled back, she saw frustration flash across his features before his mask of indifference slammed back into place. "Sign here," he said, producing marriage documents. His signature was already in place, bold and aggressive. Amara picked up the pen with a hand that only trembled slightly and signed her name, watching as the ink dried on her old life. Mrs. Chukwuma became Mrs. Kang. The officiant gathered his things and left quickly, clearly eager to be away from the tension crackling in the room. Do-Hyun poured himself a drink from a crystal decanter, not offering her one. "Welcome to your new life," he said, raising the glass in a mocking toast. "The car will take you to the main house. Your things have already been moved to your room." "My room." Amara found her voice. "Not our room." Do-Hyun's laugh was sharp. "I don't need a wife warming my bed, Miss Chukwuma. I can get that anywhere. What I needed was the appearance of stability, of settling down. You'll have your own quarters. I suggest you get comfortable. You'll be spending a lot of time there." He drained his glass and walked past her toward the door, pausing just long enough to add, "Oh, and it's Mrs. Kang now. You'd better get used to answering to it." Then he was gone, and Amara stood alone in her wedding dress in an empty room, married to a man who hated her for reasons she didn't understand, trapped in a life she never chose. Mrs. Han appeared in the doorway like a ghost. "Ready, Mrs. Kang." The name felt like a brand. Amara gathered her skirts and followed Mrs. Han to the car, leaving behind any illusion that this marriage would be anything other than a prison with expensive wallpaper. The Kang mansion made the estate where they'd married look modest. It sprawled across several acres, a modern fortress of glass and stone that screamed wealth and power. Staff members lined the entrance, bowing as Amara was led inside, their faces carefully neutral. She wondered what they'd been told, what story explained Do-Hyun's sudden marriage to a foreign student. Her room was on the second floor, a suite larger than the apartment she'd shared with 3 other students. Everything was pristine, elegant, cold. Her few belongings looked pathetic against the luxury. Her worn textbooks on the antique desk, her cheap laptop on the marble side table, her clothes hanging in a closet designed for a wardrobe 10 times the size. "Dinner is at 8 in the main dining room," Mrs. Han informed her. "Breakfast at 7, lunch at 1. Do-Hyun SSI prefers punctuality." She moved to leave, then added quietly, The household has been informed you're to be treated with respect as the lady of the house. Anyone who shows you discourtesy will answer to Do-Hyun SSI directly. After Mrs. Han left, Amara stripped off the wedding dress and hung it in the closet, hating how beautiful it was, hating that she'd worn it to bind herself to a monster. She stood under a shower hot enough to hurt, scrubbing at her skin as if she could wash away the last 3 days. When she finally emerged, wrapped in a robe that probably cost more than her former monthly rent, she found a tray of food waiting on her desk. A small card read, "Thought you might prefer dinner alone tonight. Mrs. Han." It was a kindness, small but genuine, and it nearly broke Amara's fragile composure. She ate mechanically, tasting nothing, then climbed into the enormous bed and stared at the ceiling until exhaustion dragged her under. She dreamed of Chidi, of the warehouse, of Do-Hyun's cold eyes promising ruin. The next morning, Amara woke to sunlight streaming through windows she hadn't thought to cover. For one blissful moment, she forgot where she was. Then reality crashed down, and she had to fight the urge to pull the covers over her head and hide. Instead, she got up, dressed in the simplest clothes she could find in the closet someone had filled with designer labels, and went downstairs. If this was her life now, she needed to understand the terrain. The mansion was a maze of corridors and rooms, each more opulent than the last. Amara counted 3 different living rooms, a library that would have made her weep with joy under different circumstances, a gym that looked like it belonged to a professional athlete, and a dining room with a table long enough to seat 30 people. Staff members moved through the house like ghosts, efficient and silent. They bowed when they saw her, murmured Mrs. Kang, and continued with their work. Amara felt like an intruder in a museum. She found Do-Hyun in what appeared to be his office, a stark room dominated by a massive desk and walls of computer monitors displaying what looked like security feeds and financial data. He was on the phone, speaking rapid Korean, and didn't acknowledge her presence. Amara stood in the doorway, refusing to leave or interrupt, just waiting. After 5 minutes, Do-Hyun ended his call and finally looked at her. "Something you need, Mrs. Kang?" "Rules," Amara said. "You mentioned rules. I'd like to know what they are." Do-Hyun leaned back in his chair, studying her. "You don't leave the property without my permission and an escort. You don't contact your brother or anyone from your previous life. You don't discuss my business with anyone. You don't embarrass me in public." He paused. "You're my wife in name and appearance. Act like it where it matters, and we'll have no problems. And my degree. What about it? Can I finish it?" Do-Hyun was quiet for a long moment. "Online classes only. No campus visits. If your grades slip, or you give me reason to think you're using school as a cover for something else, the privilege is revoked." It was more than Amara had hoped for, honestly. She nodded. "Okay. Is that all?" No, Amara thought. It wasn't all. She wanted to know why he'd really married her, what he needed a wife for, why he looked at her with such cold hatred when she'd never wronged him. She wanted to know if he had any humanity buried under that Arctic exterior, or if he was truly the monster everyone said. But she didn't ask any of that. Instead, she said, "Yes, that's all." She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "Amara!" It was the first time he'd used her first name, and it sounded strange in his mouth. She looked back over her shoulder. "I don't want you here any more than you want to be here," Do-Hyun said, his tone flat. "But you are here, and you're mine now. The sooner you accept that, the easier this will be for both of us. I'm not yours." The words came out before Amara could stop them. "I'm trapped by circumstances, but I don't belong to you." Do-Hyun's smile was dangerous. "Keep telling yourself that. We'll see how long your defiance lasts." Amara left before she said something that would make things worse. Her hands were shaking with anger and fear in equal measure. She found her way to the library and lost herself in the stacks, running her fingers over leather spines, trying to remember who she'd been 4 days ago. That night at dinner, because apparently she was expected to eat with her husband now, the silence was oppressive. They sat at opposite ends of the absurdly long table, staff serving course after course of food that Amara barely touched. Do-Hyun ate with perfect manners, occasionally checking his phone, treating her like a piece of furniture. "This is ridiculous," Amara finally said, her voice echoing in the cavernous room. "We're sitting 40 feet apart. What's the point? Do-Hyun looked up from his plate, one eyebrow raised. Would you prefer to sit closer? I'd prefer not to feel like I'm dining in an airport hangar. Something that might have been amusement flickered across his features. You're welcome to move. It felt like a test. Amara stood, picked up her plate and glass, and walked to the other end of the table, sitting directly across from him. The staff members serving them exchanged glances but said nothing. Better? Do-Hyun asked dryly. Slightly less insane, Amara replied. They ate in silence for a few more minutes. Then Do-Hyun said, without looking up, You stood up well in the warehouse. Most people cry or beg. Would crying have helped? No. Then what would be the point? Amara met his eyes across the table. You were always going to do what you wanted. Tears wouldn't have changed anything. Do-Hyun set down his fork with careful precision. Most people don't understand that. They think if they plead enough, show enough emotion, I'll suddenly develop a conscience. Do you have a conscience? No. He said it matter-of-factly, like commenting on the weather. Not about business. Not about decisions that need to be made. Guilt is a luxury I can't afford. Must be lonely, Amara said quietly. Do-Hyun's eyes snapped to hers, something dangerous flashing in their depths. Careful, Mrs. Kang. Psychoanalyzing me isn't part of your job description. What is my job description, exactly? Sit quietly, look pretty, don't embarrass you. That's it. That's all I need from you. Then you got a bad deal, Amara said, pushing her plate away. Because I'm not particularly good at sitting quietly. She stood to leave, but Do-Hyun's voice stopped her again. Tomorrow night, there's a dinner party. Other clan leaders and their families. You'll attend with me. You'll be gracious and charming, and you'll make them believe this marriage is real. His tone brooked no argument. Mrs. Han will prepare you. Amara looked back at him, at this beautiful, cold man who'd bought her like property and expected her to perform on command. And if I refuse? You won't. Do-Hyun's smile was razor-sharp. Because you're smart enough to know that your brother's safety depends on your cooperation. Don't test me on this, Amara. You won't like the results. It was always going to come back to Chidi, Amara realized. That was her leash, the chain Do-Hyun could yank whenever he wanted her to comply. She hated him for it, hated him for being right. Fine, she said through gritted teeth. I'll play your perfect wife. See that you do. Amara left the dining room with as much dignity as she could muster, feeling Do-Hyun's eyes on her back the entire way. Once safely in her room, she grabbed a pillow and screamed into it until her throat hurt. This was her life now. This cold, hostile dance with a man who held all the power and knew it. But Do-Hyun was wrong about one thing, Amara thought as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling for the second night in a row. She might be trapped. She might be legally his wife, but she'd never be his. Some part of her would always remain out of his reach, no matter how much he tried to break her spirit. It was a small rebellion, a tiny flame of defiance. But it was hers, and she'd guard it fiercely. If you're hooked on Amara and Do-Hyun's dangerous game, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss what happens next. Comment below, do you think Amara can survive this marriage, or will Do-Hyun's darkness consume her? And don't forget to like this video. Trust me, you'll want to be here when things really explode. See you in the next chapter.